What if you could switch authentication providers without changing a single line of application code, just by updating environment variables? We'll show how FastMCP's standardized environment variable pattern lets you configure any supported OAuth provider, from WorkOS AuthKit to Auth0, through variables like FastMCP server auth and FastMCP server auth provider setting. You'll see how this approach automatically handles token validation for providers with dynamic client registration, while still supporting traditional OAuth flows via OAuthProxy, all while keeping security settings in your deployment environment rather than hard-coded in your server. From FastMCP, import FastMCP. Hash authentication is automatically configured from environment. MCP equals FastMCP. Name equals AuthKit secured app. This demonstrates the provider-agnostic authentication pattern using environment-driven configuration. The code shows how FastMCP can automatically configure OAuth security through standardized environment variables, where you specify both the provider class and its settings using the FastMCP server auth and FastMCP server auth provider setting conventions. The pattern supports both dynamic client registration for modern providers and OAuthProxy for traditional OAuth implementations, with all configuration externalized from application code. The approach works by declaring the authentication provider and its requirements through environment variables, including the provider class, domain, server URL, and required scopes. FastMCP automatically handles client registration and token validation when the provider supports DCR, while the base URL must be publicly accessible to receive OAuth redirects. Some providers may require additional parameters beyond what environment variables can supply, in which case you'd pass an explicit auth configuration to FastMCP initialization. This pattern excels in containerized and cloud deployments, where security configuration belongs in infrastructure, not code. It eliminates hard-coded credentials while maintaining provider flexibility, though providers without DCR require the OAuthProxy intermediary. The trade-off is initial environment setup complexity for long-term deployment consistency, with the auth parameter in FastMCP initialization becoming optional when using complete environment configuration. Let's break it down line by line. From FastMCP, import FastMCP. This imports FastMCP with provider-agnostic OAuth authentication configured through environment variables. The pattern requires setting FastMCP server auth to your provider class, like FastMCP server auth providers, WorkOS AuthKit provider, plus provider-specific variables like FastMCP server auth WRKOS client ID, and scopes via FastMCP server auth scopes. For dynamic client registration providers, this enables fully automated OAuth setup, while traditional providers require OAuthProxy with manual registration. The base URL must match your server's public address for OAuth redirects, making this ideal for containerized deployments where configuration lives in environment variables rather than code. Hash authentication is automatically configured from environment. MCP equals FastMCP. Name equals AuthKit secured app. This initializes FastMCP with provider-agnostic authentication, automatically configured through environment variables following the FastMCP server auth provider setting pattern. The provider class must be specified via FastMCP server auth, e.g. FastMCP server auth providers, WorkOS AuthKit provider, with scopes and credentials defined in matching environment variables, making it ideal for containerized deployments. The name parameter identifies the app in logs, while the environment handles all provider-specific configuration, supporting both dynamic client registration for modern providers and OAuthProxy fallback for traditional OAuth flows. The base URL must be publicly accessible to handle OAuth redirects. Provider-agnostic authentication. FastMCP servers standardize authentication configuration through environment variables using the FastMCP server auth provider setting pattern, working seamlessly with any supported provider from workOS AuthKit to GitHub OAuth. The provider class must be explicitly declared via FastMCP server auth equals FastMCP server auth providers provider class name and required scopes like open-eyed, profile, email follow the same environment-driven convention. DCR-capable providers fully automate client registration, while traditional providers require OAuthProxy to bridge the gap between MCP's dynamic expectations and static OAuth credentials.
The server that knows no provider becomes fluent in all of them.